welcome to all of you joining today for the Crescendo Jazz Lounge. And we have the topic worship in jazz, encounters between spirituality and jazz. And yeah, it is my pleasure to introduce Uwe Steinmetz to all of you. Maybe some of you might also know him. Dr. Uwe Steinmetz, he was born in 1975 in Lower Saxony in Germany and studied saxophone, music theory, and the history of jazz in Berlin, Bern, India, and Boston, and received his Ph.D. from the University of Gothenburg in 2021 on the music language of religiously inspired jazz. So he's really an expert on this topic, which we are discussing today. In a real live meeting, I would say, please give a warm applause for Uwe. So in a Zoom session, just a warm applause.
It looks beautiful, though.
In that way, it looks beautiful. Thank you, all of you. And
thank you.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward, Uwe, for your nice and inspiring talk. And yeah, looking forward to hear from your heart and what you have prepared for us.
Thank you, Franz, and thank you everyone for joining tonight. It's an honor to talk to you about a topic that is close to my heart, but I get the impression it's for sure also close to your heart. And I can only add my side of this, my perspective, and it will be I think perhaps a very limited perspective tonight, but I invite you all to stay in touch if you like and kind of share perhaps questions and ideas. What might come in the future. I think Bert hinted some ideas, and I think this is all just meant to lead into an open exchange. However, I will not talk freely, and I apologize if this turns now into some sort of lecture style, but it's just a help for me to be concise and clear. But we have, of course, time to talk together in a more relaxed way. So thank you again for your invitation. And I would like to start with a general consideration of music and move then towards what I find super important for jazz as qualities, qualifying it also for worship music. Music is a partner in religious rituals in all cultures of the world and can at the same time become a medium for spiritual experiences in public spaces like concerts. This particular quality of music resonates throughout jazz history and its encounters with religions. Spiritual experiences in jazz concerts are familiar to many jazz listeners today. And in recent decades, manifold associations have opened up between the musical qualities of jazz and ritual celebrations, even such as Protestant church services. I will talk about this a bit in my second little input. But first, maybe let's consider what I would like to call jazz. Before I get to the spiritual elements of jazz, I want to clarify that I'm using jazz in the broad terminology, the broadest possible, as it is classified and promoted in our social media world as well, the musical media world. That is, music with African American roots that has become indigenous to various world cultures since the mid-20th century, through connections with local musical traditions. And now it's time for me to share the screen. Otherwise, you will not be able to see what I see. Now, can you see the screen? I hope so. Wonderful. So let's move on to this definition of jazz by Jazz UNESCO ambassador Herbie Hancock, jazz composer, legendary jazz pianist, who describes jazz in his Harvard lectures as jazz is borrows musical elements from other cultural traditions and flows transformed and transforming back into other musical cultures. Not even the same. It's a very fluid, moving thing like the Holy Spirit, I assume. Now, many musicians who are promoted by record labels or described by journalists as jazz musicians don't like this idea of being called jazz musicians. I think they would agree with Herbie Hancock. Jazz can't be just nailed down to one word. So I suggest for ourselves some wisdom from the theologian and jazz musician Jason Bivens, who has also written a wonderful book on jazz and American religion. Let me see if I can get this nicer for you. He suggests to think about jazz and religion both in quotation marks. So we keep our distance. And I think it's very helpful, as most jazz musicians would be very hesitant as well about religion, but that's another topic perhaps. Now let's move on to what I would consider ritual and spirituality and religion in this context. So we have to look at ritual from the larger word of spiritual, and you can see it seems like a kind of vague, fluid, threefold space I'm talking about when I'm talking about ritual. Rituals exist because the knowledge of events that recur and can be recreated in a similar way that are vital and meaningful for us humans. So they exist because we know there's something I can repeat, like brushing my teeth or buying flowers for a friend. It has a good effect, and I know other people do that too. So there's also a communal element. Now we're getting closer to music here. At the same time, the meaningfulness of a ritual is always located beyond the cognitive, beyond my own knowledge, also beyond a hermeneutic process. Only then, going beyond, do rituals unfold social, societal, and culture-forming binding forces, as the philosopher Byung-Chul Han, maybe some of you know him, for example, attributes to old rituals and demands from new rituals. A ritual works, so to speak, only when participants experience limits and new insights accompanied by emotional resonances. I have to be touched deeply, otherwise a ritual is not that meaningful. Then I stay on the cognitive side. I know I don't have to see the dentist as often if I brush my teeth regularly, but there's also the joy of brushing teeth or something beyond this ritual from a cognitive side that makes it so special. So a ritual works also, and not least because the participants believe in it, in a possible transformation, in liminal experiences. Liminal is a word that comes from ritual theory. We could also say in our context, spiritual experiences. We have to get fully involved. So let's look at these steps very quickly. Now you can see the threefold nature. First of all, there's some sort of gathering from our daily lives, a sort of focus into this special place in the middle, which is often called or referred to as a transitional space. That's where something happens. And then we leave, of course, the space again back. And I also introduce here a term next to incorporation in our daily life, also sending, because in concert settings and also in worship services, we send people out. So what we make out of this in terms of religious experience is basically the religious interpretation of what happens in this empty space. That's where we gather our religious manifestation, or in a modern way, we would say we embody our faith. Going a bit further, you can see I'm now bridging from musical ritual through spiritual experience to religious experience. And Douglas Marshall, for example, developed a theory on religious experience within rituals, where he says that two main outcomes of this whole process: we gather and we gain belief and belonging. I believe it like this because we could go on very profoundly about this, but I think we all know what is meant at this point when we talk also about music, that it might sound vague, what I just said, belief, belonging, and so on, but it is a great treasure. It is a gift to us from music that we can even say and assume this, and I think we all know this is possible. And as we should consider, like Martin Luther, music is a gift from God to us. We can rejoice in hearing echoes of heaven. If this really happens, then it's a gift from God through the Holy Spirit. And this can, of course, account to all musical styles. I'm not ready yet for jazz, but particular to music performed in devotional ways. And I very much like what Johann Sebastian Bach wrote in his Karloff Bible. This is possibly not Bach's edition. His would look a little older, I think, but that's the one he used. And he wrote very succinctly, when music is played in a devout way, God is always present. So it's about what Germans refer to as Haltung, andächtige Haltung. And I think the devotional quality of the way how music is performed is an essential part of any ritual, of any spiritual, of any religious act. And again, this would be a lot to go on about the theological dimensions we're discovering here, but I want to reflect only on music, so I move on. For now, I move straight into jazz. And my first example is from Albert Ayler, a wonderful saxophonist who also played bagpipes, the Dudelsack, which is not very typical in jazz, but he used it very profoundly. But the French bassist Steve Tintweiss describes an excerpt from an Albert Ayler concert at the Maid Foundation in France. Some of the very last concerts, a very famous double concert that was recorded and is still one of the best recordings from Albert Ayler, who died very early. And that concert displays very clearly what ritual can be in a jazz context. At one point, Albert picked up his bagpipe and walked to the front of the stage. He started playing very intensely, but no sound came out of the bagpipe. There was some problem, and Albert tried harder and harder, but no sound came out at all. Now, instead of doing what almost any other musician would have done, which was to stop, put the instrument down and pick up his saxophones, or ask another musician to start playing another piece while he fixed his instruments, Albert didn't do that. He just kept playing, imagining what he was doing, how would it sound, what he is trying to express. He got more and more intense and ecstatic, and the audience started applauding and screaming and cheering him on. And it looked to me like he was starting to float above the stage while he played. At that point, he looked like he had transformed into some sort of troll or mythological flute-playing shepherd god, Pan, on steroids. The audience was completely spellbound. So leaving this beautiful picture of Albert Ayler, going back to blank theory. So we have this, in a nutshell, we have an interruption in the flow of things that draws us into a special place. What's happening? There's no sound coming from the bagpipes. And it's the surprise act of the artist in that moment to create something with a very ecstatic, very embodied way of still making it work, still telling a story that leaves everyone in the concert completely transformed. So my second example is from Brian Blade's fellowship band at the Village Vanguard 40 years later. And that's an experience shared with me by one of the band's two saxophonists. We can see on the right here, Melvin Butler, who plays tenor saxophone, who's like the whole band practicing Christian, and in his tradition, a Pentecostal Christian. It's August 2012 at the Village Vanguard in New York City. On stage, I'm surrounded by other band members of the fellowship band, with whom I've toured since the late 90s and made many recordings for Verve and Blue Note. The audience in the front row seems mesmerized, staring intently at Brian Blade's moves as he makes the cymbals swing and bangs on his floor toms to inspire the soloists. I stand to the left of the stage, rocking back and forth as alto saxophonist Myron Walden reaches an emotional peak on his instrument, doing a solo in Return of the Prodigal Son, practically screaming and crying. It's such a powerful ritualistic moment that Blade gets up from his drum throne, pauses for 3 seconds, and lets out a loud cheer before resuming the groove. The crowd, in turn, responds with screams and cheers, as if some unseen force has caused them to involuntarily cheer as well. Bassist Christopher Thomas and I exchange looks, our mouths agape at the transcendent moment unfolding on stage. It feels like we are floating, like the invisible forces cooperating with us to create this special moment. Or maybe we were just the human vessels through which the Holy Spirit manifested itself. So I've been looking for a video of this concert, but there is none to my knowledge. But here's another Brian Blade jump. Okay, 1. Now we see the man is getting up in ecstasy, but continues to play. Now he holds the tension and sits down and continues to play. This is actually from a Wayne Shorter concert with John Petitucci at the bass. So this happens more often on drums, this particular leap. Now I ask you to stay with me for a second on some sort of philosophy, because what Melvin Butler puts out here is very, very important and very interesting. He says, only the human vessels for the Holy Spirit. Now that's modest, right? the German philosopher Martin Heidegger's vascularity, Gefäßhaftigkeit, coupled with pneumatological interpretations united on stage in the village vanguard. Heidegger's reflections on the being of the thing in considering a jug, ein Gefäß, leads him to its emptiness. The emptiness, this nothingness in the jug, is what the jug is, as the grasping vessel. So Melvin Butler, deliberately mentioning this bridge to Heidegger, elaborates that the spirituality in jazz, or let's say the ritual potential of jazz, arises from emptiness, from this emptiness in the middle of the musical flow. And he has other examples. I don't have the time to go into this. The musicians with their craft, their musical languages, and their compositional arrangements form the walls, the floor, and the opening for what happens on stage. And the saxophonist Immanuel Wilkins, one generation younger than Melvin Butler, also on Blue Note, puts it very profoundly here on that side. As he says, my band, the vessel, nearly a safe place, a shelter for what can take place spiritually. Immanuel Wilkins. So nevertheless, I have to move away from this exciting thought for all who love Heidegger. The material structure of the vessel is relevant still when it comes to interpretation and an interaction with the content, whether we have a glass of wine or a clay pitcher for water. We all know this makes a difference in our hands and in the way how the content tastes. So transferred to spiritual jazz, this means that besides the absolute openness of the band to the current moment, at the same time, what they put out in their music as a compositional framework, and I would also say is a ritual framework to encounter, is set out in musical arrangements. And in Melvin Butler's example, it's the musical retelling of the story, the biblical story of the prodigal son. So I invite you all now to listen to the Fellowship Band and enjoy the album version of The Return of the Prodigal Son. We have prepared it in a way that you can hear it in good quality, I believe. And thank you very much for this, Christina.